Mine arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon when I least expected company. I'd planned nothing more ambitious than finishing my mystery novel and perhaps baking something if the mood struck. Instead, destiny knocked at my door in the form of my grandson. Marcus hadn't visited in almost half a year. Our family gatherings had grown sparse, and when we did see each other, he wore that polite mask people put on when they're just going through the motions. But standing on my doorstep that particular day, something was different. His jacket hung loose around his shoulders despite the pleasant weather, and his eyes carried a weight I recognized from my own mirror during harder times. "Nana," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I hope you don't mind me just showing up." I ushered him inside immediately. The floorboards announced his arrival with their familiar creak, the same sound that had welcomed 3 generations of visitors to this home. He paused in the entryway, taking in surroundings he'd known since childhood as though seeing them with new eyes. "This house always feels different than anywhere else," he murmured. I guided him to the sitting room where afternoon light pulled across the worn sofa. He didn't settle right away. Instead, he drifted to the collection of family photographs ranged on the bookshelf, his attention fixed on one particular image my late husband Thomas captured during our coastal vacation decades ago. His smile easy and genuine. "I've been thinking about Grandpa Tom lately," Marcus said. "How he moved through the world, how he treated you." Thomas had been gone for 16 years. Marcus had barely been an adult when we lost him. The observation caught me off guard. "What brings him to mind?" I asked gently. He shrugged, still studying the photograph. The way he seemed comfortable in his own skin, like he knew who he was and didn't apologize for it. I don't think I appreciated that when I was younger. I eased into my favorite chair, sensing the real conversation beginning to surface. Marcus finally sat across from me, his posture tense, elbows resting on his knees. "I've been struggling with something," he admitted. "You're the only person I could think to talk to about it." My heart softened toward this young man who rarely let anyone past his carefully maintained exterior. "Then let's talk," I said. "Whatever's on your mind, we'll work through it together." He rubbed his temples, searching for words. "It feels like I'm standing at the edge of something important, but there's this invisible wall stopping me. And I can't even explain what the wall is made of." His confession hung between us, raw and honest. I thought of my own moments of paralysis, times when fear had kept me frozen at life's thresholds. "That feeling isn't unusual," I told him. "You're not stuck, Marcus. You're just at a crossroads. And maybe you need someone to tell you it's okay to choose the direction." His shoulders dropped slightly, some tension releasing. "I knew you'd understand." We talked for over an hour. He opened up about his career, about the pressure to maintain appearances, about feeling like he was performing a version of himself rather than actually living. The candle I'd lit earlier burned lower as his words came faster, freed from wherever he'd been storing them. At one point, I reached across and took his hand. He held on, not desperately, but firmly, as if anchoring himself. It was such a simple gesture, yet it bridged years of polite distance between us. As shadows lengthened across the room, neither of us moved to brighten the space. The growing darkness felt like permission to be more honest. "I don't know where I'm headed," Marcus said finally, "but I'm tired of just existing instead of living." I squeezed his hand, then stopped waiting. Life moves forward whether we're ready or not. I learned that lesson the hard way. When he left that evening, something fundamental had shifted. His stride seemed lighter, more purposeful. I watched until he disappeared around the corner, lamplight catching the dampness in his hair from the mist that had begun to fall. Closing the door, I knew this wasn't the end of our conversation. It was the beginning. Rain arrived that night like a whispered secret, soft and persistent. I'd wrapped myself in a throw blanket with my book when the motion sensor caught movement outside. Before I could wonder what animal had triggered it, a familiar knock sounded at the door. Marcus stood in the rain, hood pushed back, water tracing paths down his face. "Sorry for the late visit," he said. I was driving and just needed somewhere that felt safe. I stepped aside wordlessly. He entered, wiping his feet on the old Matt Thomas, and I had purchased from a craftsman decades ago. The scent of rain followed him into the warm glow of my living room. His breathing came quick and shallow, the breathing of someone who's been holding themselves together too tightly for too long. "Tea?" I offered. He nodded gratefully and sank onto the sofa while I busied myself in the kitchen. There's something meditative about preparing tea properly, warming the pot, measuring leaves, waiting for water to reach the perfect temperature. Each small action trades urgency for calm. When I returned with steaming cups, Marcus had removed his jacket and was staring at the old grandfather clock in the corner. "That clock belonged to my father," I said. "It runs a few minutes slow if you don't wind it with the right touch. At least that's what I always told Thomas." "I've been thinking about time," Marcus said without looking away from the clock. "How it feels different depending on what you're carrying with you." I set down the tea tray. "What are you carrying tonight?" He cupped his hands round the warm mug, letting steam fog his glasses. When he met my eyes, the usual guardedness had vanished. "Fear," he said quietly, "and regret, and expectations I've been pretending don't crush me." I waited, giving him space. 70+ years of living teaches you that people need room to land safely when they're ready to leap. "Something happened at work," he continued. "My supervisor called it a performance problem. I called it finally noticing I couldn't breathe there anymore. So I walked out. Didn't resign, just left. And when I got outside, I had no idea where to go. My feet brought me here." He sipped his tea, and I watched his shoulders drop slightly. Rain whispered against the windows. "I'm sorry you had a difficult day," I said. "But I'm grateful your instincts remembered this address." A small smile touched his lips. Then he added, "I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore." Nana, that word supposed carries such weight. I'd watched him wear it like ill-fitting armor since childhood, always trying to be the dutiful grandson, the reliable son, the one who solved problems quietly and never caused trouble. A dangerous habit. The world will gladly let you disappear if you teach it to overlook you. "Can I show you something?" I asked. He nodded, and I rose from my chair, ignoring my protesting knees. I led him down the hallway to the small room at the back of the house, Thomas's old workshop. It still smells like him, all end wood shavings, graphite, and something sweet like sawdust that never quite fades. After Thomas died, I kept the door closed for months. Then one morning I opened it, dusted the workbench, and began learning the names of his tools. I couldn't bear the thought that his hands had known these things and mine never would. The room remained as we'd left it, chisels ranged by size, a hand plane with a worn handle, jars of screws labeled in Thomas's precise handwriting. On the far shelf sat a small wooden box that no one had ever asked about. I lifted it down and placed it on the bench. "I made this after he passed," I explained. "Took me weeks to sand the corners smooth. My first and only woodworking project." I kept thinking I'd make more, but perhaps one thing done honestly is enough. The lid creaked open to reveal a stack of folded index cards, yellowed with each and bound with twine. Marcus looked at me questioningly. "Notes," I said. "Thomas used to leave me little messages in the bread box of how we'd argued, tucked in my coat pocket when I seemed tired. After he was gone, I found blank cards and started writing my own. Not to him exactly, but to the future versions of myself who might need reminding of certain truths." I offered him the top card. He read it, and something in his expression softened, like someone setting down a burden they'd carried too long. "What does it say?" I asked. He held it so I could see. "You are allowed to be uncertain. Rest anyway. Begin anyway." We stood there with the card between us, the rain drumming steadily overhead. Marcus reached for another card, read it silently, then carefully tucked both in his pocket. "Can I tell you what's really underneath all this?" he said, his voice dropping. "I think I don't want the life I've built, and I'm terrified of what everyone will think if I dismantle it." I leaned against the workbench, feeling the old would press into my side. I could have offered advice, shared stories, wrapped my response in neat wisdom. But what I remember most from my own hardest seasons isn't what people told me, it's that they stayed. What if we don't label it yet? I suggested. What if we make a small plan that won't overwhelm you? He almost laughed. A small plan, yes. First, you sleep. Then we eat something nourishing. After that, we write down 3 things you don't want and 3 things you do want. Tomorrow we take one tiny step that honors that list. No announcements, just movement. He was quiet so long I could hear the clock in the living room marking time with its patient tick. Finally Marcus said, I haven't slept properly in weeks. Then let's start. Dresses. Marcus stood in the doorway like he used to as a boy, hands in pockets, taking in the space as if it might judge him. Do you ever feel guilty about resting? He asked. All the time, I admitted. So I practiced not apologizing to my pillow. He cracked a genuine smile. When he lay down, he didn't say goodnight. He just stared at the ceiling, waiting for permission. I switched off the light and left the door slightly ajar, the way I used to for my children when they were small and storms were frightening. Back in the living room, I sat with my cooling tea and wrote on a fresh index card 3 things he doesn't want: to be praised for work that empties him to keep. Pretending a tight chest is normal to be the family's dependable ghost. 3 things he does want: to create things with his hands, to have real conversations that feel meaningful, to wake without dready propped the cart against the clock so I'd remember to share it in the morning. Sometime after midnight, I woke to soft footsteps. Marcus stood in the doorway, hair mussed, wearing the unsettled look people get when their mind won't release its grip. Couldn't sleep? I asked. I keep hearing my supervisor's voice, he said, and my father's, and my own. He rubbed his neck. I don't want to be unfair to them, Nana. They all just want what's best for me. He was right about that. Love and pressure often wear identical coats. Come sit, I said, patting the sofa cushion beside me. We sat together in the dim light. I taught him a breathing technique a nurse had shown me during Thomas's illness. When my heart felt like a frightened bird trapped in my chest, breathe in slowly for 4 counts. Hold for 4, exhale for 6. We practiced together. In the quiet room, I could feel the rhythm gathering us toward stillness. After several rounds, his chest relaxed visibly. He rubbed his palms together, slightly embarrassed. It's strange, he said. I'm 37 years old and learning to breathe from my grandmother. Lucky you, I replied. I happen to be excellent at it. He laughed softly. His gaze drifted to the mantel where Thomas's photograph watched with that gentle smile he'd had whenever he'd just fixed something. I miss him, Marcus said. I didn't know him the way you did. But tonight I keep wondering what he'd say. He'd say there's no award for how long you can hold your breath. I told him. He'd say to take care of his people, and by his people, he'd mean me and you. Because in this family, that word stretches to include everyone. We sat until the clock's slow hand reminded us to try sleeping again. This time Marcus yawned and headed back down the hall. At the doorway, he paused at double quotes. Nana, yes? Will you be upset if I call my mother tomorrow and tell her I need some space? I'll be proud of you for using your own voice, I said, and I'll be here when you do. He nodded and disappeared into the quiet. I woke just after 6 to the smell of rain easing and that peculiar stillness that comes when a storm has made peace with morning. In the kitchen, I sliced fruit and toasted bread, the rhythm of the knife a gentle metronome for my thoughts. When Marcus shuffled in, hair standing up, he looked simultaneously younger and older. I placed a plate before him, and he ate like someone who'd been forgiven something. I kept this, he said, pulling out the index card. It helped. I wrote another list, I said, handing him the one from the clock. He read it carefully, then read it again, as if mapping himself against the words. This last one, he said, tapping the card. Waking without dread. I don't even know what that looks like. You can borrow one of my days. I offered. You can belong to mine for now. It starts with going to the workshop and choosing something small to fix. His eyebrows lifted. Fix something? There's a drawer in there that's been misbehaving for months. We stood shoulder to shoulder at Thomas's bench. I showed Marcus how to run candle wax along the edges, how to check for swelling in the wood, how to press and listen to let the object tell you what's wrong instead of forcing it to comply. It's a lesson applicable to many things. He loosened a screw, sent it a whisper off the side, and the drawer glided smoothly with the dignity of a well-made thing. There, I said, the universe is already slightly improved. He looked at his hands, surprised by the evidence they still belonged to him. I forgot how this feels. What? Making something cooperate without conquering it. He stayed most of the morning. He called his mother from the porch, not an argument, just a quiet boundary set with love. He returned looking both relieved and tender, as if the world had leaned closer instead of pulling away. We took a slow walk around the block. The neighborhood wore the colors of wet bark and fallen leaves. A child on a bicycle splashed through puddles and waved at us like an old friend. When we sat again, Marcus asked to hear a story about Thomas I'd never told anyone. So I told him about our first winter as newlyweds, when the heating failed during a snowstorm and Thomas rigged up a contraption with a fan and space heater to pull warm air down the hallway. We ate soup on the floor by the bedroom doorway, because it was the only spot you couldn't see your breath. He looked ridiculous, I said, but he kept saying we're warm enough, like it was a sacred promise. Marcus laughed in that open way I rarely heard from him, then grew quiet. Nana, he said finally, what if I don't go back to the same job? Then you don't. What if I disappoint people? You will, I said simply, and they'll recover. Your life isn't a committee project. He studied my face. How did you learn to say things like that? By staying alive, I said, and by loving people who didn't always approve of how I chose to stay alive. He reached across the table, then not for my hand this time, but for the index card. He turned it over and wrote something on the back. When he slid it toward me, I read, meet every Thursday. Build something. Talk like it matters. I can do Thursdays. He said, even if I go back to work temporarily, I can do Thursdays. Then, on Thursdays, I said, we'll be carpenters of more than just wood. He flushed slightly, a little embarrassed by words that ventured too close to sentiment. But he nodded, slow and serious. We cleared the table together and washed dishes, passing plates like a practice team. Before he left, he stood at the doorway again, the same place he'd stood the day before. Only this time he folded me into a hug that wasn't careful or brief. It was steady and grateful, speaking things neither of us needed to say aloud. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For not making me make sense, he said. Just for giving me tea and time. I watched him walk down the path with a stride that didn't apologize for itself. The sky had cleared completely. The neighbor's maple tree held sunlight between its leaves like captured gold. I stood in the quiet of the house for a while, then returned to the workshop and opened the repair drawer, sliding it in and out, because I enjoyed the sound of sure, gentle confirmation. On the bench sat the wooden box of notes. I added a new card in the same firm script I'd used for grocery lists, and permission slips, and messages to a future I couldn't yet see. You can change without vanishing. You can rest without failing. Love is the room we build to return to. I placed the card beneath the others and closed the lid. In the stillness that followed, I heard the house exhale, and I realized that the remarkable thing wasn't that my grandson had arrived unannounced or even that he'd asked for help. The remarkable thing was simpler than that. We let ourselves be known. And once that happens, ordinary days are never quite ordinary again.